It's Sunday, December 7, 2025. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5 Minute News. Our guest today is the founder and executive director of Leaving MAGA, Richard Logis. Welcome to the Weekend Show.
Hi, Anthony. It's good to be with you. Pleasure to finally meet a fellow Midas Touch contributor. So thanks for having me.
Well, that's right. We all operate in our little silos, don't we? And so it's very nice when we cross the streams. It's a little bit like a Marvel movie when Spider-Man shows up in the wrong film. So you can be Spider-Man on this occasion. We have a lot to talk about. I'm so impressed with the work that you do. For those people that don't know you and the Leaving MAGA movement, just explain to us how it happened for you. You had a kind of moment of enlightenment, didn't you? And there were 2 or 3 events during your support for Donald Trump, and you were actually very proactively supporting Donald Trump as a creator almost. And before you realized or you saw the light and then switched your allegiance to the Democrats.
You know, in 2015, I felt very politically lonely, and I felt that the two parties were the same, that they failed to represent most of America. And when Donald Trump declared his candidacy, I was not an immediate supporter. I was more of a curious onlooker. But I found myself increasingly nodding in agreement with some of his points, especially about our economy and jobs going overseas, once vibrant communities that had been hollowed out. And I liked that he was a true outsider, no government, no political, no military experience. And I felt that the established political order had failed enough that it needed to be obliterated and started anew. But after several months since he had declared, I decided to work on the campaign, and in early 2016 became a grassroots volunteer. I contributed part of the call script. I recruited people to vote for Trump. I phone banked. I made calls all across the country. And then after the victory in 2016, I just got deeper and deeper into the MAGA world. I became a pundit. I sought the attention of the president. So I was this aspiring MAGA influencer. I professionally produced my own podcast. I wrote dozens and dozens of freelance stories. I had bylines in places like Fox and The Federalist. And I considered myself on the right side of history as a real American against all of the fake Americans on the wrong side of history. I spoke at Trump groups. I was a donor and sponsor of groups. I was somewhat well known locally in Republican circles for my MAGA activism. But the cracks started to form in 2020. I knew that the president was mismanaging the pandemic. There were the stolen election lies. There was January 6th. And then there were a couple of accelerants for me that eventually led to my departing of MAGA. The first was actually not from Donald Trump. It was from my governor in Florida, Ron DeSantis, who in the summer of 2021 platformed COVID anti-vaxxers at his press conferences. And then there was the final straw for me, which was the Uvalde, Texas school shooting on May 24th, 2022. And it was shortly thereafter Uvalde that I quietly left MAGA. But there was something, Anthony, that was really gnawing at me after I quietly left, because I was always so unapologetically public in my support for Trump. I felt I needed to reciprocate that in my renunciation of the movement. And it was on August 30th of 2022, I published a mea culpa. And in that apology, I said that I regretted supporting Trump and MAGA and that I was sorry and I wanted to apologize to anyone I may have hurt with my words, deeds, and rhetoric. And the God's honest truth is I never thought anybody would care. And I call that day of August 30th to 22 my Leaving MAGAversary. But from the moment that I had declared my now opposition to MAGA, I had friends and family of those who were in the thrall of MAGA write to me, desperate, trying to ask me, how do I get my friends and family out of MAGA? I feel like my relationships are lost. And I spent the next year just telling my story to media and different organizations. And from the recounting of that story was Leaving MAGA as an organization was begotten from that year of telling my story to whomever would really hear it and listen to it. And we founded the organization as a new community for people who have left the MAGA movement, and also for those who have doubts about their support for Trump or questioning their belief system, and also for friends and family. Reconciliation is a really key part of the work that we do. And one of the ways that we have put that reconciliation to work and into action is we have weekly support groups for friends and family. And it's a place for them to acquire the tools necessary to better navigate their relationships with their friends and family who are still in MAGA. And the demand has been overwhelming, so much so that I think we're going to need several support groups a week. But we're very proud of what we've done there. And as an organization, I'm happy to report that we have never been busier.
It's so interesting how deep this cult of MAGA goes in terms of the emotional connection. Some people refer to it as a cult. Others, I mean, certainly the psychiatrists that I've interviewed talk about a national mental health issue where people are literally kind of, they cannot get out of it. And that's why it requires so much help once people kind of see the light as you did. How would you describe it, therefore, this desire to support Trump, even though a lot of people know that he's not a good person and they know that he's a fraudster and certainly a troublemaker, that still it's like owning the libs is more important and therefore voting against your own needs goes ahead of the national interest.
I refer to MAGA as a community. It's why Leaving MAGA was formed, to counter as a community the MAGA movement as a community. And the reason I refrain from referring to it as a cult is only because we want to extract people out of MAGA. And I feel like if we think of them as cultists, it makes them dig their heels in deeper.
Right. So you don't want to demonize people, right?
Exactly.
For their membership. Yeah.
We don't want to alienate them. For the ones who start to have doubts, we want them to feel like they can come to us and not be judged, not be ostracized. I understand why people not in MAGA might look at MAGA and think, oh, this is a cult. And because it's illogical, the level of fidelity and devotion, especially to Donald Trump himself as a person. And I can attest to the fact that there were some cult-like aspects of being in MAGA for me. For example, I had a second family, and that second family oftentimes took precedence over my own blood family. And I neglected some of my duties as a father and a husband and as a parent because of my MAGA activism. And walking away from that second family was one of the reasons it was so hard to leave. It took me an entire year to come to the realization that what I was supporting did not comport with my values, and that I had allowed myself to believe years worth accumulatively of lies and falsehoods and conspiracies. And when I was in MAGA, we used to say the outside world was a cult and the crazies. So we would say, we're not in the cult. We're it's the outside world who's the cult.
Right, but that's what's so clever about it, right?
Yeah,
it's this kind of flip.
That's right. It's reversed. We're the real Americans. Everyone who's against us, they're the fake Americans. And it didn't matter even if they were Democrats or liberals or progressives. If there was a Republican or conservative against us, we actually lumped them all in the same group as an existential threat. If I had met you, Anthony, when I was in MAGA, I would have deemed you an existential threat to my life and my livelihood and my country and my family. That's how militant the mindset is.
Right. But it doesn't go both ways, though, Richard, does it? Because whilst Republicans might hate Democrats and kind of demonize them, Democrats, and I'm speaking very generally here, don't hate MAGA. If anything, they feel sorry for MAGA Republicans and are kind of certainly open and willing to offer them a safe place to land.
I do a lot of social media posts on this topic about how I know that it's a big ask of Democrats to go high when MAGA goes low. But if we're going to build a bigger tent, we need to be the bigger people. And yes, there are comments that I receive sometimes from Democrats and liberals that are not friendly, that are full of curse words. You know, I received one today who referred to me as a traitor, but that's rare. Most Democrats and liberals have been very, very supportive of the work of Leaving MAGA. And I think it's because if we're going to have that big tent and we're going to push back against all of the anti-democratic and unconstitutional actions of the Trump administration, we need to form these unlikely but necessary alliances. So yes, it's true that sometimes liberals might judge us, myself and the leaders of Leaving MAGA, those who have left. But in fairness, the vast, vast majority of Democrats have welcomed us and invited us into that big tent that they're helping to build.
It's hard, isn't it? Because Democrats encompass a vast range of views and opinions and liberal minds and liberal thinking. It really isn't as simple as the MAGA offering, which to me can really be summed up in a handful of words and phrases. And how does it feel for you now, having extracted yourself? Because I look at people in MAGA and I just think of them as very stressed, like it's a lot of carrying an awful lot of weight and emotional stress. How does it feel to have extracted and to be, living clean, to coin a phrase?
Leaving MAGA was good for my psyche and my soul. And what I came to realize after leaving is that I was always in these perpetual states of desperation and panic and paranoia and rage and despair. And mind you, Anthony, that's how I felt being on the winning side.
Right. Yeah.
It wasn't that the first term we were on we had literally shocked the world. We had taken on the world and defeated the world because the entire developed world was against the Trump campaign. But we had emerged victorious. And in MAGA, it was exciting, though, at the same time. It was enthralling. It was new. It was novel. It was unprecedented. We made history as the first civilian president in our history without any government or military experience. So, of
course, he didn't expect to win in 2016.
Looking back on it now, I think that he was as shocked as anyone else. Even though I don't take any pride in this prognostication, I remember being on public record saying that Trump would be the nominee and would win the general, because I was out and about so much during the campaign that I would talk to people, and sometimes they'd whisper it below their breath, but they would say that they were going to vote for Trump. And I just felt like something was happening on the grassroots level that was going to propel us. And it turned out, I was prophetic in that sense, that I felt like there was a burgeoning movement that was going to lead us past the finish line. And I thought that Hillary, if she had won, I felt like the Democrats would have never lost power again, which to hear that now sounds so delusional.
Right. Well, it's an exact reversal of what we're hearing now with MAGA, of course, where it seems unlikely that they will ever relinquish power. He certainly didn't want to in 2021, did he? So, let me just ask you a couple of things about the cast of characters, because and it's kind of connected to what you just said, is that when I look at Trump as an individual, but also the people that he surrounds himself with, everybody from Stephen Miller through Pete Hegseth, all of them, they are all compromised, so clearly compromised. A group of interesting misfits, to say the very least. They all look like they are struggling themselves with an inner turmoil where they've been bullied and have become the bully, or there is a long and deep story requiring significant therapy for each and every one of these characters. And so I can understand how they find solace in each other's company. But that's not really good for the country when you have people that are so broken being put in charge of government departments. Is that how you see it now too? Do you recognize that a lot of these, if not all of these individuals, are very compromised and problematic themselves?
I think people who have experienced and endured trauma in their lives are more susceptible to MAGA and right-wing politics. And if anyone looks at, for example, the testimonials at our website, which I would really encourage people to read at our leavingmaga.org site, a leitmotif across the testimonials is trauma. People enduring religious trauma, political trauma, economic trauma. We have one gentleman named James, who was a black former MAGA supporter who so desperately wanted to fit in that he wore a Confederate flag wristband as a black man. And he endured intergenerational racial trauma. I look at someone like Stephen Miller, Hegseth. Something has happened to them in the course of their lives that made them gravitate toward this form of politics. And I feel like in trying to find the empathetic self within me, I think a better question than what's wrong with you is what happened to you.
Yes.
And there's something about those guys, without me trying to psychoanalyze them, they do seem to revel in the lies and the cruelty. And, Trump himself, he doesn't really believe or stand for anything. He's whatever he needs to be. And, every relationship, including that relationship with his base, is transactional. And MAGA is a black and white world. It's not the multicolored world that Democrats recognize, for the most part, the country and real life to be. MAGA is black and white. It's wholly emotional. So for all of the mythology of rugged individualism within MAGA, the fact is that it's a conformist. The ethos of MAGA is conformist. I'll give you a specific example. Any information that remotely refutes the pervasively held beliefs of the community is rejected. It's shunned. So I think Trump is somebody who just goes along with whatever he heard last, whether it's from Stephen Miller or it's from maybe a Steve Bannon or it's from Fox News, and he just runs with that. So in that sense, he's not an ideologue. He's really more of a chameleon who just goes along with whatever Rust vote, decides.
Well, he's a populist, isn't he? So he is appealing to whichever audience he is standing before. Right. And the thing is, to those of us on the outside, all of the lies and the propaganda seem so obvious. He's a really terrible liar, and his henchmen are also terrible liars. Why is it not obvious to the people that you used to associate with in the same way that it is to liberal-minded people on the outside, that this stuff simply can't be true? To pick a number like $22 trillion worth of investment in the US, like, it is preposterous, and yet he says it and people buy it.
I have a hypothesis that I believe that many in MAGA deep down know that Donald Trump is a dishonest person. and that many in MAGA deep down know that something is amiss in the country. So why go along with it is a very understandable question. For many of them, they are so invested emotionally, spiritually, personally, politically in the community that it's more comfortable and easier to keep going along with this than it is to stop in their tracks the way that I did and say, you know what, all of these lies, all of the rhetoric, all of the vitriol against those I disagree with, it's wrong and it's un-American. For someone to leave, to go through that epiphany, I always like to paraphrase the late venerable Ernest Hemingway. The epiphanies happen gradually and then suddenly all at once. And I believe that there are more than we realize who have quietly left, and more than we realize who are having their doubts right now about their support. And I think that some of these cracks and chasms that we see forming, I wish that it were happening more rapidly. I share that sentiment with others who wish that as well. But I can tell you, Anthony, I do think, based on everything that we're observing, I do think that cracks are forming, and I think that the president recognizes that. And I believe that it's not a coincidence that the more he recognizes those cracks, the more unhinged he'll become.
Right.
You know,
we are definitely seeing that.
Yes.
Quite publicly. The pushback that he gets, quite not that much pushback, because most of the corporate-owned media are kind of batting for him through media ownership now. And so, but certainly in the independent sector, there is so much pushback, some of which is now finally getting quoted in the mainstream too. But you definitely see him ping back and become more angry, more aggressive, whether it's calling reporters ugly or piggy or whatever else, to the actual policies seeking to invade Venezuela, for example, on the premise of a kind of narcotics bust, whilst at the same time pardoning a drug trafficker who was about to serve 45 years in prison. The hypocrisy of that surely must be obvious to even MAGA, that you can't claim to want to be on the right side of drugs and then go pardon a drug dealer.
I think that it is obvious to them, to so many in MAGA, but their being and their identity and their personhood is intertwined in this MAGA movement in this community. And, it's that old concept and paradigm of sunk cost fallacy, where you get so deep into something that even though you can reverse course, it's more difficult to walk away than to just keep going. And for those in MAGA who are recognizing that these falsehoods, I really believe that for some of them, there's going to be a line of demarcation. There's going to be a red line. There's going to be one lie too many. There's going to be one unnecessary death too many. These were some of the reasons why I left. I remember thinking for months in my lead up to leaving MAGA, how Trump and the Republican Party deemed acceptable avoidable deaths and suffering. Ron DeSantis platforming COVID anti-vaxxers meant that he deemed it acceptable that there were avoidable deaths and suffering from COVID. And it was at that time, if we remember, that the Delta surge was ravaging the country. And that was when children were getting sick and dying from COVID. January 6th, the defense of politically motivated violence. Once again, acceptance of avoidable deaths. I just came to these lines where I couldn't any longer cross them. And it was painful, but it was liberating for me to emancipate myself from this alternative manufactured reality. And that's the part about MAGA that that is true, which is that there is an addictive quality to it. There are outrage-induced dopamine hits,
right,
that come from being in MAGA, and it stems from the rage that people feel because they feel that anybody who's not with them is trying to take their guns or trying to indoctrinate children to be transgender Marxists in the public schools, or trying to import foreigners and brown people to replace white people. These kinds of beliefs, even though for some in MAGA, they don't openly and publicly talk about this, it's what they believe. And I'm not defending that ignorance and those beliefs, but I think it's important to stress that everyone is susceptible to being influenced. And I think I look at people in MAGA and I see a large swath of America who has been inculcated into these right-wing version of politics, who have been exploited and manipulated and have had their common normal fears and concerns manipulated. You know, those concerns about economic opportunity and a safe country and good schools for our children. There's agreement that pro and anti-MAGA people have on a lot of these important, relevant issues, but people in MAGA, Anthony, they're detached from reality. So there is a kind of psychosis that is present within MAGA, because for so many, they're living in a reality that's shaped by all of these lies that are crafted by Trump and the Stephen Millers and all of the people in the administration. And, you know, I've had this conversation with people in MAGA where I've said that Donald Trump lies about essentially everything. And the response that I get from people in MAGA isn't, that's not true, Rich. He's an honest person. The response that I get is, well, Democrats lie also.
Right.
So that statement, you know, it's almost a Freudian slip. They're acknowledging that the president lies about essentially everything. I said in a video testimonial that I gave at the Democratic National Convention that Trump's toxic superpower is lying. And I worked on Kamala's campaign, you know, full disclosure to viewers. I was a Republicans for Harris co-chair in Florida. And even though we didn't get the outcome we wanted, it's not a moral victory, but what I'll tell viewers is that everyone I worked with on the campaign, we all worked so hard to try to get Kamala elected. But unfortunately, we didn't get the result that we wanted. So I think people in MAGA, they're starting to slowly catch on, and they're realizing that whether it's a lie about immigration or the economy or the Epstein files, cumulatively, they're coming to a point where they're starting to say, you know, Trump is lying about this, and it makes me wonder what else he might be lying about.
We have to take a quick break, but I want to come back and talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene, because she seems to have seen the light in the last few weeks, and that was a bit of a surprise to everybody. Probably the last person I would expect to kind of cross over. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. Have you ever found the perfect item online, a couch or a lamp, and then you see the sticker price and it reminds you that it's out of reach for your budget? Well, that's why I use dupe.com. It's simple. Just type dupe.com / before any product URL, and Dupe instantly shows you similar and more affordable alternatives. It's perfect for finding the best deals for your holiday shopping. And these aren't sketchy knockoffs. The truth is, most products that you see online, from furniture to fashion to gadgets, are mass-produced in the same factories. Brands just slap on different labels and markups. Well, Dupe surfaces those same pieces for way less, so you're not overpaying, just for a name. That expensive sofa, handbag, or light fixture you've been eyeing, Dupe finds them, or something nearly identical, for a fraction of the price. It's no wonder that Dupe has gone viral on TikTok. Millions of people already use it to save thousands on furniture and decor, sometimes 60, 70, or even 80% off, and it's completely free. This holiday season, Dupe is giving away 1 million Dupe points, and you can turn those points straight into gift cards. Here's how it works. You earn Dupe points just by shopping with Dupe. No payment, no catch. Just search for the products you want, save money, and rack up points. Want even more? Share Dupe with your friends. They save, you earn points. That means more gift cards for both of you. And here's the kicker. For a limited time, the first 10,000 people who go to dupe.com/weekend will get 500 Dupe points instantly. Redeemable for gift cards, no catch. But spots are limited, so don't wait. That's dupe.com/weekend for 500 free Dupe points today. Use your Dupe points and gift cards to make the most of your holiday shopping. Go to dupe.com/weekend. Fresh start, same system. Banks win, you pay. Fees and calls piling up monthly unless you fight back. PDS Debt has already helped hundreds of thousands cut their debt and put money back in their pockets, not the banks. Whether you're struggling with credit cards, personal loans, or medical bills, PDS Debt has custom options to help you get out of debt. They go beyond the numbers to understand your unique financial situation and craft a personalized plan designed just for you. There's no minimum credit card score required. They're here to help you save more, pay off your debt faster, and start putting money back where it belongs, in your pocket. PDS Debt is A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau, boasts thousands of 5-star reviews on Google, and holds a 5-star rating on Trustpilot. Why? Because PDS has helped hundreds of thousands of people get out of debt. Every month you wait costs you more in interest and fees. The best time to start was yesterday. The second best is right now. Don't wait another month. Take back control in 30 seconds. Get your free personalized assessment and the best option for you at pdsdebt.com/weekend. That's pdsdebt.com/weekend. pdsdebt.com/weekend. We're back on the Weekend Show with Richard Logis. I'm Anthony Davis. Richard, Marjorie Taylor Greene has apologized for her role in what she described as toxic politics, a reflection that comes amid this feud with Donald Trump. He has now effectively disowned her, and she's not prepared to be primaried or fight for her seat without Trump on her side. Do you think that what we've seen from her is something that can be reproduced by others? Because there are rumors that there are other people in Congress, Republicans in Congress, who are also considering hanging up their hat, that things have become too divided even for them. I mean, that's a very good thing in this moment, isn't it?
It is, and I hope that there is some red line for the Republican Party. I have said for quite a while that I feel that the party as a whole would let Trump do whatever he wanted. Maybe, just maybe, I might have been a little mistaken about that. And I will say that I'm always happy to be wrong if it's a positive outcome. With Congresswoman Taylor Greene, I really look at it as there's one of two possibilities. The first is she's just being opportunistic, which most politicians are inclined to be, or that she's had a genuine change of heart. And I personally, as someone who went through a change, and I know others who went through their own transformation, I'm going to keep an open mind about her own this new version of Marjorie Taylor Greene we've seen. And I think that my observation of her is that I think that she is genuine in her apology. What she said on The View, for example, about her mea culpa about following QAnon. I think for her epiphany happened gradually and then suddenly all at once, where it was building up for some time. And now she's got the president against her, which is, there's no finer compliment for her to have that. So I think that she, as an elected official who's a Republican, she may very well be at the vanguard and could influence others to say publicly, this is all too much. It's gone too far and it needs to be reined in. And my hope is certainly that given her visibility, because she is one of the more visible members of Congress, that visibility will usher in some kind of mass apology to come from other elected officials who will then go public and say and put their name to the record of wanting to say that what Donald Trump is doing and what the administration is doing has simply gone too far and it's too anti-American, and they'll go on the record and say that.
The list of policies that Trump has now put his hideous signature to are almost too egregious for many Republicans too. I mean, to the point of militarizing cities, putting the National Guard on, of course, the tragic shooting of 2 National Guards people, and the way that Trump responded to that and weaponized that immediately by adding another 500 National Guards, lambs to the slaughter, effectively, not taking any responsibility for the fact that Americans of any stripe do not want to have the military on the streets. It is not a comfortable feeling. And yet, he continues to push in that direction. And it does seem that he's almost blind to the fact that he is responsible for the huge drop in tourism. Why would anybody want to come here with the military on the streets or ICE abducting people and people having their phones snatched at the airports and potentially being deported when they're just heading here on vacation? There's plenty of other places to go. This is all a direct response to the militarization and the authoritarianism that is coming out of the White House. Do you feel that MAGA supporters recognize that is also a step too far, and a kind of Nazification of the U.S. government is not what they signed up for either?
I'll say about the 2 guards people who were shot, and now we have a fatality from it. Those individuals were shot because of Donald Trump, and they never should have been there. And the fact that they were there and this happened, whatever the circumstances surrounding the shooter, whom we know came legally and was vetted through the Trump administration, not through President Biden's administration. So it's yet again another more acceptance of avoidable death and suffering and trauma. And I'm going to come back again to the point that I think many in MAGA deep down know that so much of what Trump is doing is wrong, it's unconstitutional, and it's anti-American. But it's hard to speak up, partly because when you go public in opposing Trump, you're exiled out of the MAGA community. That's what happened to Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's why she went from being a loyal foot soldier to Trump to then becoming persona non grata. So I think that people in MAGA look at, for example, imprisoning people awaiting deportation hearings. There are over 200 judges, including dozens of Trump-appointed judges, who have ruled against the administration and said you can't imprison someone who's awaiting a deportation immigration hearing. There was just a story that came out in Politico that I was reading about that. So now you've got hundreds of judges and you've got the Trump administration defying these court orders. So for those in MAGA, I think there's this cognitive dissonance. How can you be for law and order and then support a president who is defying court orders that have very explicitly prohibited him from doing what it is that he's trying to do? But the cognitive dissonance, it takes time to unfold itself within an individual because of just how because of how detached they are to the movement and their loyalty to Donald Trump. The reason for that fealty to Trump is because he is the leader of that community. And it's why after he's off the political scene, it's not that MAGA is going to go away, but it will unravel. And I think that we have evidence electorally to show that. You know, when Trump's not on the ballot, MAGA candidates do not do well.
Well, the psychiatrists say this too, especially those who've worked in prisons with gangs. And they say the moment you remove the gang leader, the rest of the gang really falls apart. It isn't really able to hold together without that figurehead. The other thing, I suppose, that's most important for people, and the reason you say, you know, people voted for Trump in the first place almost a decade ago, is because he was a businessman, or certainly played one on television, and the idea that, well, he must be good with money, despite his multiple bankruptcies and kind of, you know, doesn't understand international trade. And, you know, we know the story, so we don't have to repeat it. But people are obviously struggling. Finances and wages have not kept up with the cost of living, and this is a problem throughout the world, but every country deals with it differently, and the US has ignored it. I mean, the minimum wage is still $7.25. It's not enough to live on. And yet Trump and MAGA Republicans oppose raising the minimum wage. They oppose so many things that would lift people out of poverty, and not least SNAP benefits and the various things we saw associated with the shutdown. And now we're hearing that Trump has basically turned off a project, you know, a clean energy revival in what was former coal country. And, you know, Biden had earmarked billions for former coal communities in Appalachia. And Trump has taken all of that away. Shut down because he doesn't understand climate change either. So he shut down all of the green energy revolution and claims it's a hoax. People will suffer. Republicans will suffer. And their allegiance surely will suffer too.
You know, there are enough published reports, Anthony, that show former Trump supporters who supported him in 2024 having remorse because they were in agriculture and they lost a grant, or there was a grant that was frozen, or there was a government worker who lost their job. And I know that for many out there, they might say, well, serves them right, they should have known better. But the fact is, they really didn't know any better, because the information sources that they consumed didn't tell them this, or they were just apolitical Americans who didn't follow the news. And the reason that Trump got elected, I believe there are two primary reasons. The first is cost of living. I think that that's probably well documented. People felt dissatisfied with their own economic condition, which is a reflection of capitalism,
right,
more than it is a reflection of Joe Biden.
But it's an entirely valid reason, and people should be allowed to make that choice.
Agreed, because people will vote based on money.
Yeah,
you know, they'll vote based on economics. And the second reason is mis and disinformation. But the lie about the economy is where Trump's it's where he's going to lose favor with a lot of people in MAGA, because he can lie about immigration. And people in MAGA can say, well, no, we need to deport all these illegal alien criminals. He can lie about that. He can get away with it to some extent. But economically, he can say all day long about prices being lower. But people in MAGA are still seeing their grocery bills increase. Depending on where they are in the country, they're still seeing high prices of gas. They're still seeing healthcare costs, which are scheduled to increase if the Obamacare subsidies are not approved legislatively. So he can lie about that, but the numbers don't lie. And people in MAGA are feeling right now that everything that he's saying can't be true, because their own bottom line in their household is not going down, it's only increasing. So I think that his lies about the economy are where some of these cracks are going to further form, and where some of these chasms are going to keep widening more and more based on the economy and his lies about cost of living.
And so when it comes to finances, the other very kind of visual example of Trump's lack of self-awareness is him redecorating the Oval Office like a Russian palace, or spending money building a ballroom. I didn't know people really had balls anymore in this way. That also must have an effect on people when they see the kind of lavish nature of his existence and the money wasted with the golfing and the executive style travel. Not to mention the fact that under every Republican administration, the deficit has increased and public spending has increased, and there's a lot less to show for it. Does that kind of move the dial at all?
I think it does, and I think that all of these reasons that we're giving in our conversation today about whether it's about the economy, or it's about defying court orders, or it's about pardoning those who have defrauded investors, all of these little death by a million paper cuts is where I think these cracks start to form and start to widen. And when Trump ran, he very, very effectively positioned himself as giving voice to the forgotten person. And I think that there were valid reasons for supporting Trump. I try to be objective about this point, even with my history in MAGA and then post-MAGA. People had reasons to feel left behind, and reasons to feel that lifelong politicians like Hillary wouldn't solve problems that existed in people's households, for their families, for their jobs. But MAGA is contradictory. And there is a significant contradiction here about looking at Trump as a voice for the little guy, when we see how he garishly adorns the Oval Office, or he destroys the East Wing, doesn't simply do a renovation or an addition, but actually tears down part of the White House. And, we used to talk in MAGA all the time about our history, and don't whitewash history, don't rewrite history. And here's Trump actually destroying part of our history. So that those contradictions, they do beget cognitive dissonance. And it's in the cognitive dissonance when people in MAGA start to say, I wonder what it is that he might be lying about. And then there's the painful realization that they believe those lies. And then what they do next, to some extent, is up to us, because we can tell people, like we do at Leaving MAGA as an organization, that it is okay to admit that we were lied to and that we believe those lies, but that we have agency, and on our own volition, we can control our destiny, that even though we may have been duped by lies one after the other, year after year, we don't have to keep living that way. We don't have to keep living a political life buttressed by myriad lies. So I think that it's these one reason after another, after another, after another, is why people right now are starting to have their doubts, and why more and more people, I believe, are going to start having doubts as we will see in the ensuing months.
The White House has rolled out a new section of the official website that publicly criticizes and catalogues media organizations and journalists that claims distorted coverage. They're basically calling it misleading, biased, exposed. And it refers to the Boston Globe and CBS News and networks as media offenders of the week, and accuses them of inaccurately portraying Trump's remarks, certainly about those 6 Democratic lawmakers who released the video encouraging the military not to follow illegal orders. This, to me, kind of smacks of desperation, where they're trying to kind of rewrite the narrative in an official way. And actually, by putting it down on paper, it makes it even more obvious, to me anyway, that they're quite anxious and nervous about the direction that things are going. Is that fair to say?
I think so. And I think it speaks to the fact that Trump views the presidency in a despotic kind of way. We've heard the rhetoric from him, I essentially talk that I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
And part of the reason he says that is because he doesn't believe that the Republican Party would ever stand up to him, which is why I have said, and I hope that I'm wrong, about the Republican Party having no red line when it comes to Donald Trump. So whether it's using the military for political purposes, targeting journalists, I used to refer to the media, non-MAGA media, as the Democrat media industrial complex. And I even trademarked that phrase at one time. It's what I call, I didn't just call it the liberal media. I called it the Democrat media industrial complex, that it was Democratic propaganda and agitprop, referring it to Goebbels, from Nazi Germany, and referring to Democrats as malignant and domestic terrorists. This is the kind of language that I use. And it's the kind of language that Trump uses because he relates to the way that dictators think. It's how he views the presidency. It's why he feels that it's appropriate for him to use his power to seek out retribution against people who have opposed him in the past. And I never thought about Donald Trump that way when I was in MAGA. I saw him as someone who was maligned. Whenever he was attacked, I felt that we were attacked. And people in MAGA still feel that way right now. But that desperation has increasingly intensified. And the more unhinged he is, the more desperate that he's feeling, and the more he realizes that even though it might be slow and not as fast as we want, that the base is starting to slowly turn on him just a little bit, day by day.
It almost seems to be a race now to the midterms, where he wants to get as much done as possible because there is no pushback. As you say, most, if not all, of the Republicans in Congress are either silent, living in fear, not just of being primaried, but living in fear of some kind of, retribution, or being humiliated. I mean, there's various things that Trump can do, but I've certainly heard that some of them are genuinely scared for their lives, not necessarily because of Trump, but because of people in Trump's orbit or MAGA Republicans who would then kind of seek that retribution themselves. So much of this could have been stopped if these Congress people grew a backbone. I mean, we know about Mike Johnson and his allegiance. He really is like very much a puppet of Trump. And that's why Trump doesn't feel the need to put anything through Congress, because he has that hold over it. But what of the others? Because, you only really need a handful of Congress people to vote against Trump. And really the House could be flipped. So what is holding all of them back?
I think that they're afraid of the MAGA voters. And part of the reason that they're afraid of them is that you need to, in most districts across the country, to win a primary and get to the general, you need to have the support of some MAGA voters. And MAGA voters are the most influential bloc within the Republican Party. I remember, Anthony, when I was in MAGA, it was a fantasy of ours to kill off the GOP and make it a MAGA party. And I think that it's accurate to say that that's been achieved. A person like Mike Johnson, he and so many other Republicans in Congress have abdicated their duties to their constitutional oath, which requires them to enforce checks and balances. But I'm cautiously optimistic that if Marjorie Taylor Greene can make a decision to, let's call it for what it is, perhaps leave MAGA, then there's a handful of other Republicans whom I know deep down can muster the courage to leave. And even if they're not MAGA, either leave the Republican Party or defy Trump and say that these actions have gone simply too far. So I know that there are some who have it in them to do it. I think that I think most Republicans in Congress, this is again my hypothesis, I think they look at Trump and they probably laugh and mock him behind his back.
Sure.
You know, they fear him because of MAGA supporters and needing their votes. But I think if Donald Trump had not won the presidency in 2016, he wouldn't be talked about at all right now within Republican circles. He'd be a mere afterthought. But that's in an alternative universe, I realize that. But I think it is accurate to say that they don't really respect him. They do more fear him because of his voters. And I think, again, speaking to the fact that Trump views the presidency as a quasi-dictatorship, he probably appreciates more being feared than liked and respected.
Well, he certainly enjoys being called a dictator and even a fascist. I mean, I felt that with the Love-In with Zoran Mamdani, where, you know, he said, it's okay, you can say I'm a fascist, it's easier than explaining it. I mean, that was almost an admission that, yeah, I'll take that. But that's because Trump wants to be in a kind of hall of fame of dictators. He has managed to pivot the party away from European allies with Ukraine and put them on Russia's side. And would you not say that certainly the war in Ukraine and that pivot, but also the Epstein files, are maybe the two issues that might just allow a few Republicans in Congress to step away?
I think, yes, and in particular the Epstein files. What's actually remarkable about that story is that in our current media landscape and environment, stories tend to come and go. But that story just will not go. And it lingers. And the fact that there was bipartisan support to release those files tells me, again, that there are some Republicans, and in particular in the House, who maybe they're giving thought right now to coming out in opposition to the president publicly. They probably would do it at the risk of their political career, but I don't think it's unreasonable for us to expect some leaders to show some courage. They're elected and they take an oath to the Constitution. And I believe that many of them going along with this president are violating that oath. For some, it might get to be too much for them. And sitting and being idle and silent, I can see how for some of them, my optimistic hope is that some of them are going to come out and they're going to say that we should know what's in the Epstein files, that we should not have a peace plan that's brokered by the Russians, with Ukraine having no say, no input in it. But again, I see it as another couple of paper cuts to lead to these cracks. It's a good time to be on the outside looking at MAGA, and it's a good time for the country right now watching these cracks form, because I think there are more to come.
Sure. Well, it certainly helps having survivors of the Epstein story standing on the steps of the Capitol, appealing to the president to make this political, and to hear him at the same time saying it's a Democratic hoax. Mm-hmm. It can't be a hoax if there are real human survivors standing there crying in front of the cameras with their trauma. It's a very poignant, the humanity has to kick in at some point, I would say. We have to take another quick break, but I want to come back and talk about racism in MAGA and consequently the immigration policies of Donald Trump. We'll do that next on The Weekend Show. The guys at True Classic started with a simple mission to bring premium, comfortable clothing to the masses, because looking and feeling great shouldn't come with a designer price tag. And clearly people agree, with over 25 million shirts sold to 5 million customers and more than 200,000 five-star reviews. True Classic has become a staple in closets everywhere. But this brand isn't just about fabric or fit, it's also about confidence, about helping people show up every day feeling put together without trying too hard. That's what makes True Classic the perfect gift this holiday season. Whether you're shopping for your dad, your brother, your partner, or now even the women and kids in your life, True Classic has something for everyone. The same premium comfort and perfect fit that built the brand are now available for the whole family. These pieces fit where they should, feel incredible, and don't break the bank. You get that tailored look without sacrificing comfort or blowing your holiday budget. I've been wearing True Classic for a while now, and you can feel the difference the moment you throw one on. It's tailored where you want it, relaxed where you need it, no bunching, no stiff fabric, no BS, just a clean, effortless fit that actually works for real life. So, skip the guesswork and the overpriced designer stuff. Give comfort, give confidence, give True Classic. You can find them at Amazon, Target, Costco and Sam's Club, or head to trueclassic.com/weekend to grab the perfect gift for everyone on your list. We're back on The Weekend Show with Richard Logis. I'm Anthony Davis. Immigration has obviously been the other thing alongside the economy that Donald Trump ran on, and certainly many of the MAGA Republicans are very keen to see changes. Trump claims to have closed the border, but there's millions of people flying in and out every single day, so again, it simply doesn't make sense. It is clear to me, though, that there is... And maybe it's the propaganda associated with the Great Replacement theory that Tucker Carlson was pushing on Fox, and Rush Limbaugh talked about for years on the radio, where people do feel that people of color are becoming the majority in the US, and they feel completely uncomfortable with that. Statistically, it's entirely incorrect also, but facts don't seem to matter in this argument. So, and please don't take offense by the question, but are MAGA Republicans genuinely this racist, or is it something that they've just been misguided about?
I think that I try to be a little nuanced in my answer on this, because when I was in MAGA, there was a panic about white people about us losing our majority status, because we looked at it as the more we lost our majority status, the more it would benefit Democrats, and that a majority-minority country would benefit Democrats much more than it would MAGA and the GOP. If we look at, for example, senior citizens in the MAGA community, they grew up with white males, for the most part, in positions of power and influence. And I think it's a trait of our Homo sapiens species that we are adverse to change. So what happens is, as white males start to lose a little bit of their dominance to women and people of color, LGBTQ+, the right wing exploits that fear of change.
And a black president didn't help also for 8 years, right?
Didn't help. And we could look at the Tea Party.
Yeah.
And how the Tea Party, which was a precursor to MAGA, we can see how they responded to people like Barack Obama. And it wasn't just disagreeing with Obama. It was accusing him of murdering people through Obamacare. So same kind of rhetoric. that's engaged in right now was present at that time. Are there some people in MAGA who are just stone cold racist? Yes. But I don't, Anthony, believe that most are racist. I do think that many have a panic about white people losing that majority status because of the reasons that I was fearful of it, of losing power, of losing influence. I think that's what the fear is. And of course, people in MAGA will say that's not true. Everyone's welcome in MAGA. We're not the racists. The Democrats, the KKK Democrat is really the racist. But the fact is there is a white panic, and it existed when I was in MAGA, and it exists right now. And for the right wing, instead of saying, hey, these gains that we've made are actually good for the country, that these gains in diversity are actually good for white people also, the right wing says, hey, you're being displaced. Hey, you're being replaced. Hey, you're losing your majority status, and we're going to have socialists and communists take over if we don't support Republican politics. That's the kind of rhetoric that is ongoing within MAGA.
But do Democrats push back enough? Because, I rarely hear Democrats. I mean, the Democrats rarely get any airtime in right-wing media anyway. But there is an opportunity, and it's something I've not heard, where they say we are not Marxists, we are not socialists. They don't actually seem to take on this criticism head on. And obviously there seems to be a kind of lack of democratic leadership in this moment, which isn't helping, this kind of void where all of there's just very, very little pushback. But in terms of educating Republicans on who Democrats actually are and how, a capitalist country can't become a socialist country, it's simply not possible. We're too far gone. And that most Democrats are capitalists also. I don't really hear that type of language from anybody other than Bernie Sanders, who's an independent.
I'm not qualified to give political campaign advice, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it right now.
Let's hear it.
I think one of the biggest problems within the Democratic Party brand is that they do not talk to voters outside of their base. Do you remember many months ago, Democrats were doing town halls in red areas?
Sure.
What happened to those?
Yeah.
They just went away. And I remember feeling so heartened by those town halls because the people in those red districts, they don't ever hear from their Republican leader because the Republican leader wins by 20 points no matter what. All he or she has to do is just show up and they win. But Democrats had taken the initiative and said, we're going to go talk to these voters. And when they go and talk to those voters start to realize that actually there might be some agreement on issues. But Democrats are afraid of going into unfriendly territory. They're afraid to be in hostile grounds, but that's how you start to persuade. That's how you start to peel voters off the other side, is by actually face-to-face. When you're face-to-face with a Democrat and you're a MAGA supporter or you're a Republican, it's harder to call them a Satan-worshiping pedophile to their face, because being in front of people, it humanizes everybody. And dehumanization is what I specialized in when I was in MAGA. And leaving MAGA, you have to take responsibility for your actions in order to leave. But one of something that happens is you stop dehumanizing people. So I think, to your point, Anthony, that Democrats I think that they're afraid to get in front of voters who are not in the base. And how else are you going to peel away Republicans? How else are you going to appeal to apolitical, independent-minded voters like myself? I worked on the Democratic nominees of Kamala's campaign. I voted blue up and down the ballot, but I'm also a very political person. I consume news all the time. Most Americans don't do that.
Right.
They don't.
a good example of this, sorry to interrupt you, was the Mamdani Trump Oval Office moment, where he'd been calling him a jihadist and a Marxist and a communist for weeks. Then he says, I'm inviting him to the Oval Office, which a lot of MAGA found quite weird. And then when you finally saw them together, there was this kind of very public bromance. And Trump said things like, well, he just wants to do the right thing by New Yorkers. And obviously I care about New York and I trust him and I don't. And it was like, what? That was, for me, really the first time I'd ever seen that kind of MAGA bubble burst on mainstream and corporate media. They had to show it because Trump was in the picture, but they also exposed the fact that Mamdani represents reality. He is just a normal New Yorker, and his faith is irrelevant. His skin tone is irrelevant. He's really doing the right thing for the people.
Complete stone cold silence from Republicans. An hour before, if you went and looked at the social media of so many Republican so-called leaders, an hour before that meeting, it was President Trump is going to show that communist what's up. He's he's going to show him what capitalism and American exceptionalism really look like.
Well, he was going to deport him. I mean, that was one of the threats.
Right. It's, he should be deported for being a Marxist, socialist, communist, jihadist. And then there's a bromance. And I think one of the reasons there was a bromance is because Trump figured out that he can't bully Mamdani. So MAGA had a lot of silence after that meeting. And to me, the silence was a positive. It was a positive because maybe it gave just a little bit of validity to the fact that Mamdani did something remarkable in New York, which is he took on both major parties and won.
Yes.
Because both parties saw him as a threat. Now, somewhat ironic here is that Trump was viewed as a threat by both parties. The Republican Party viewed him as a threat in 2016. It was another reason why I gravitated to his campaign. We knew the Democrats would oppose him, but the Republican Party stood in such opposition to him that I, as this guy who thought the two parties were the same, I thought, well, if both parties don't like him, I'm in.
Yeah.
He's my guy. But I don't think that Trump could. I think he figured out that he was not able to bully Mamdani, and he could have taken one of two pathways. He could have basically done a typical Trump and said, well, we disagree a lot. I wish him well, whatever type of rhetoric. But instead, it wasn't that. It was someone who looked like they were a long time, like they'd been buddies for a very long time. And it did pop something of the MAGA bubble because there was this expectation, and that expectation never came to fruition.
Well, Trump was asked, does he look like a communist to you?
Right.
And he kind of looked at him and I mean, it's simply the case that Mamdani outsmarts Trump 100-fold. And you really you don't want to get into all that because it'll end up like that scene in the Oval Office with Zelensky and Vance and all of the screaming and shouting, and that didn't really benefit anybody. Just staying on the racism subject, though, how do MAGA feel, and will it help people move over or leave MAGA when they see Trump welcoming in the Saudi prince, for example, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and accepting the gift of a Boeing 747 and doing business in the Middle East that clearly is enriching Trump? Is that having any effect? Because, Trump has banned all Muslims from entering the US, and yet this Muslim is welcomed with a red carpet.
One of the tenets of the Trump campaign and the first presidency was being anti-globalist. And I'm going to come back again to the point of contradiction. Accepting a jet, welcoming an individual who by our own intelligence has confirmed that this individual had assassinated a Washington Post reporter. That's globalism. So it's important that we who are not in MAGA point out respectfully, without putting people in MAGA on the defensive, that Trump claims to be America first, and there's this nationalism, and there's this nativism, and there's this anti-globalism. But in reality, all of these international dealings, the emoluments, the gifts, the business overseas, all of it is globalism. There's no other way of there's no other way of defining it. And I look at that and think, how can you reconcile all of those events with America first? Because America first means some vision of the country that people think existed at one time but really didn't.
Well, it's going to mean a very expensive dishwasher. I mean, that's the thing that people don't quite understand, is that again, like capitalism being too far gone, globalism is too far gone now.
Yep.
We build a Boeing aircraft, many of the parts are coming from China. We cannot do it without that. And yet Trump not only didn't seem to know that, as demonstrated with the tariffs. I mean, some of the airlines, I think Boeing even themselves, or maybe it was Airbus, realized that they could fly an airplane direct to a country and deliver it and avoid the United States and therefore the tariff. You know, you have the American customer meet them in another country just to avoid Trump's ridiculous tariffs, numbers that were randomly generated by Trump in an equation that was based on a hunch. Oh, well, it's based on how they've treated us, and not understanding that the size of another nation's economy means that they can't buy in the quantity that we can, and it doesn't mean that they're screwing us. I mean, none of this seemed to have been explained by any media on any side to anybody. They just carried on reporting it like it was normal.
And of course, we can't rely on right-wing media to explain this, because they spin it into something that's a positive.
Right.
And it's why people who are surprised to learn about all of this really couldn't have known better.
Yes.
Because the media that they consumed didn't tell them. The media I used to consume was the media I wrote for, Fox and The Federalist. I wrote for a site called WorldNet Daily, WND, which is the site that originated the Obama birther conspiracy. And I knew that. But because I was in a political war of good versus evil, I overlooked that. There was a lot that I overlooked when I was in MAGA.
But did you know that Hawaii was America? I mean, genuinely.
Yeah, that I knew, but I also didn't. It didn't matter to me that other sites I was writing for were engaging in this kind of dehumanizing rhetoric.
Yes,
that I did, because I looked the other way. There were times that when Trump was running for office, the comments about women, John McCain. The late John McCain, comments about Muslims. I didn't agree with them, but I looked the other way. And I did because I believed that the alternative was way worse.
Finally, let's talk about the prospects for where the country's headed right now, because it does feel like things are going to get a whole lot worse before they can get better. And so much of this deconstruction of the administrative state is going to have a negative effect on all Americans, no matter what their politics. And this is a problem for MAGA, isn't it? Because, they voted for this. And some people are saying out loud, well, you get what you deserve. Is that fair to say that people are going to have to go through some turmoil and trouble and bankruptcies and huge debts? I mean, there is this fake economy right now where people are literally spending on their credit cards in the name of patriotism and keeping quiet about it.
I think that this is what real life is, that there are repercussions for our choices. So I don't have a problem with someone experiencing the after effects of their choice. What I don't engage in is I avoid the I told you so type comments, or the
Sure.
blank around, find out, because I feel like those are more unhelpful than helpful. We want people who suffer hardship because of this administration, who are in MAGA and start to have doubts. We want them to listen to those doubts. And if they're going through a crisis of conscience based on their own choice, we want them to feel like that they have an out. And that's what we've tried to do at Leaving MAGA. We've tried to give this new community, this safe space, this soft landing for people. So when it comes time for them to say, I don't want to do this anymore, they have a place to go. I didn't have a place to go when I left. So I consider myself very, very fortunate and lucky that I was able to navigate my way through the crossroads.
Well, it's like people leaving prison, right? They are so institutionalized that the only way of life they know is to reoffend, and they end up back in prison because there isn't somewhere for them, and that is proven time and time again. And it. I mean, obviously I don't want to equate MAGA Republicans with criminals, but there is a similarity in terms of coming over from the dark side to the good side, or a place of normality at least, where the value of life is a little higher, and where people are not at each other's throats all the time.
Yeah, that's part of the transformation of going from being in MAGA to leaving is knowing that we're going to walk away from a community who I believe are good people deep down.
Sure.
And have been led astray, but also willfully adhere to some beliefs and rhetoric that I think are indefensible. And I always say that no one should construe anything I say about myself and my experience as a self-defense. No one coaxed or coerced me into supporting Trump or being this aspiring MAGA influencer and doing a podcast and writing a byline for Fox News or any of the work that I did. There are many who did probably as much as I did, and many who did more than I did, but no one did it more devoutly than I did. That's how in I was as this MAGA soldier. But I think once MAGA starts to unravel, the point you make about recidivism is really crucial, because we need to make sure that we show people an alternative to whatever the next iteration of MAGA is, because we don't want them to fall prey to the predations of whatever the next version of MAGA is. What Trump did very effectively is he took a form of right-wing politics that have existed for generations, and he branded it. Mm-hmm. And he called it "Make America Great Again," MAGA. And when it starts to unravel, we want to make sure we catch people before they fall and they're entrapped by whatever the next version of MAGA is, to reduce and prevent that recidivism.
Because Trump did say that, his immigration enforcement would be getting rid of the criminals. And now they seem to have criminalized asylum. So they're going after everybody. And for me, it's at what point the humanity kicks in. When you see these memes of people being, mums being separated from their children and dads being thrown in the backs of unmarked vehicles and the kind of violent nature of these militarized private army, effectively, for Donald Trump, who answer to nobody, where the legal system is ignored and the court system is ignored and there is no due process. that has to be a step too far for just 10% of MAGA Republicans. And it only really takes 3% to flip the election. So
right.
It really isn't a step too far. And Trump must know this, because that's why he's really leaning into the election interference, the gerrymandering, goodness knows what the midterms and the general election will look like. But they must know that the effects of their extremist policies are not to everybody's taste.
Well, I think the midterms are going to bring a wholesale rejection of MAGA. I think that a lot of people who didn't vote in November, this past November,
yes,
I think are going to come out to vote. I think it's going to be driven, as it always is, by the apolitical and independents who are going to drive this renunciation of MAGA electorally. And we have people who are deported without due process. We have American citizens,
yes,
who have been apprehended. We have people here on protected asylum legal status who are now, for no good reason, having that status rejected. And now it's going to result in deportation back to their home countries that are where they'll face poverty and they'll face political violence and terrorism in their own country. We have asylum laws because we believe that we can provide safety for people who are trying to have a better life for themselves and their families and are trying to escape the type of upheaval that exists in lots of countries throughout Latin America and South America, etc. But the inhumane aspect of this, I think, is another reason that these cracks are starting to form, because there's only so much that a MAGA person, I believe, can look at these stories and see one separation after another and think that this is okay. I think that many in MAGA are starting to quietly look at what's happened with immigration and are saying the president is not being honest. He said it would be criminals deported, and it's not. That is not what's happening.
We have to finish, but I'm grateful to you for the work that you do. And I can really now see the importance of offering this safe space for people who want to step away from this extremism and come to a place of calm and kindness. And I'm grateful to you for finding that yourself as well.
You.
Richard Logis, thank you for joining The Weekend Show.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Anthony.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5 Minute News. You can find my Substack, The Anthony Davis, and you can join the 5 Minute News YouTube channel as well. I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.